When will I die?
If you would like to learn about fairy folklore, delve into modern fairy faith spirituality, and explore fun and fanciful fairy-themed events, please subscribe to Fairy Fortunes for new videos every Friday.
Hello my fair friends, I'm Ruby Ruse, and on today's episode of Fairy Fortune, we're going to be delving into some very taboo questions to ask during a divination reading. Hey, but before we dive into that topic, I'd really like to hear from you. Do you think there are certain questions that cross a line in divination? Are there some questions that you think that no one should ever ask a divination reader or a fortune teller? Please let me know in the comments down below. I'm really curious to know your thoughts. Now, I've come across some very interesting questions in my time as a modern day fortune teller. But as I was researching this topic for you, I came across a large list of questions that I've now grouped into some broad categories that are considered taboo to ask a modern day fortune teller, and especially a modern day tarot reader. And you'll find that most of the resources that I've listed for you down below in the description box are from the perspective of a tarot reader. So the first of these broad categories that are considered taboo to ask in a divination reading are third-party questions, or questions that involve another person outside of yourself as the person asking that question. Another taboo question, yes or no, straightforward questions. Another category of questions that are considered taboo are questions that you don't really want to know the answer to. And finally, it's very taboo to ask a modern day fortune teller the same question over and over again. So let's start with third-party questions. Some examples of those that I've found for you in my research are things like, will my daughter marry her boyfriend? Or even, when will I get married? Or is this my soulmate? Or things like, is my husband cheating on me? These are examples of third-party questions. There are many fortune tellers and diviners that feel that this type of question really isn't yours to ask. They feel that it's snooping or cheating, if you will. It kind of pushes the boundaries of consent. You may not have the consent of the other person to be asking this question. But I feel that when a person comes to a diviner with this type of question, it is because this issue is very much affecting their own life and their own psyche. And so I feel that as long as you're looking at the issue from the perspective of the person asking the question, you're not really crossing the line of consent. You're not really snooping or spying on another person. You're helping the person deal with this issue. Why do they feel they need to have this information? Why is not knowing the answer to this question a driving and conflicting force in their life in the current moment? So I do feel that third-party questions can be very helpful to explore with someone. And actually, in the system of geomancy, which was very popular in the Renaissance era, and also is the divination system that the fairy fortune divination cards were based on, third-party questions are a very commonplace question to ask in geomancy. You do have to appreciate that in older times, there wasn't necessarily a place to go to solve certain problems. There weren't any insurance investigators. There weren't necessarily lawyers readily available. And there wasn't necessarily a trustworthy police force in a rural community. So asking third-party questions in older times used to be very commonplace in divination because it was the only way to start an investigation, to experiment with possibilities. And that's the idea behind divination. Divination isn't supposed to give you the answer. Divination is supposed to help you explore possibilities, and options. It's supposed to engage your mind in a creative way so that you can start looking at the problem from a different perspective. So personally, I don't see any problem with answering third-party questions for people as long as the question is framed in, here is the issue as it affects you as the person asking this question. Now remember that I said that most of my resources on this topic come from the perspective of a tarot reader. Tarot is one of the most prevalent forms of divination in our modern age, and that might be why most of the resources that I found on this topic were for tarot. Now, tarot is not necessarily the best divination system to use for yes or no questions. However, there are divination systems that do focus expressly on yes and no. For example, a pendulum is often used to get a yes or no answer. And as I mentioned in another video of mine, the categories of divination, the pendulum and the Ouija board are both examples of intuitive divination, and the Ouija board also can be used to answer yes and no questions. Another form of divination that would be very helpful in a yes or no question would also be the Urim and Thummim. So if you would like to know more about these types of divination, I would highly recommend that you watch that video on the categories of divination, and I will have a link for that in the resources down below for you. Once again, geomancy is often used to answer yes and no questions. That actually might be why I am so driven and so interested in geomancy, is because I do feel that geomancy can answer a broader range of questions. So that might be why I am so interested in geomancy and have completely set the tarot aside. But even when somebody comes to me with a yes or no question, I'm also going to delve a little deeper into that subject matter. There's always a little bit more information given to you in a divination reading beyond yes or no. And once again, I must reiterate that divination is really not about a definitive answer. If someone comes to me with a yes or no question, how I approach that question as a reader is, if the answer is yes, here's what that might look like for you. This is how a yes answer to that question might affect you. Here are some things you might want to think about if that answer is yes. So some very taboo questions that I've uncovered regarding yes or no questions include, will I win the lottery? You can come to me and ask me this question. And once again, I'm going to approach that question of, if you win the lottery, here are some things that you might need to know. Or the cards may suggest that the answer is no, you will not win the lottery. So if you won't win the lottery, the cards might give me some information on why you are so desperate for fast cash. Another example of a taboo yes or no question would be something like, am I pregnant? And really, that extends beyond to any and all questions regarding a medical diagnosis. Now, in older times, like I said, you didn't necessarily have a trained doctor or herbalist available in your village. The only option in older times was to visit a diviner to maybe get some insight on what might possibly be going on. However, and in the modern age, there are just so many better options to consult than a diviner for a question regarding a medical issue. I wouldn't necessarily turn away somebody that asked me if they were pregnant, but I'm going to preface that question by saying a pregnancy test would be a more accurate way to answer this question, but we can explore the possibility and what that might mean for you, and we can explore how you feel about that answer, whatever it is that comes up in the cards. But I would highly recommend that you see a doctor regarding this question that you have. So in that broad range of yes or no questions might be questions considering property. Should I buy this piece of property? Can you go to a diviner for this? Can you see a fortune teller to explore that question? I personally think yes, you can go to a diviner to explore the question as to whether or not you should purchase a particular piece of property. Once again, if you were to ask me this question as a fortune teller, I would explore if the answer is yes, here's what that might look like for you. Here are some things about the property that would be good for you. Here are some things about the property that you might want to consider more about. If someone comes to me as a fortune teller to explore this type of yes or no question, this suggests to me that they need some assistance exploring the decision. And I think that that is something very valid to bring to a fortune teller, because you're trying to uncover options. You're trying to unravel your emotions and your thought processes behind these types of questions. Let's move on and talk about asking the same question over and over and over again. Now, especially if you're learning divination, it's most often counseled that you don't want to keep asking the same question over and over and over. And the idea is that you just want to let that question lie. Take the information that was given to you and process it and mull it over and see what you learn from that experience. That's really what divination is supposed to give you, is something to mull over. If you don't like the answer that was given to you, instead of asking the question again, maybe your time is better spent reflecting on why you didn't like the answer. Because divination is all about exploring the options, looking at the possibilities, getting some creative perspective on the issue. So the best practice when you come with a question in divination is to receive the message and process it. However, with that said, especially when you're trying to learn divination for yourself, the best advice that I can give you on that is to ask the same question every single day. And that would be, what's going to happen to me today? So you do a divination for yourself, and then you see what message comes through, and then after the day is completed, you reflect on the divination you did and see whether your predictions had anything of relevance to give you for that day. And the reality is this: when we're seeking just plain advice, not spiritual advice, just plain advice from our friends, we might ask multiple friends the same question, because each friend has a different perspective on the issue that we're seeking advice for. So I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with the advice not to ask the same question over and over again. To be honest, I think maybe the reason that fortune tellers and diviners, and maybe especially tarot readers, don't like you to ask the same question over and over again is maybe that they don't like being wrong. You have to appreciate that divination is more of an art form and less of a science. Even the best of psychics have been known to be wrong. And in fact, if we go back to the whole medical issue, a lot of times you have to go to multiple doctors before you receive a final diagnosis and can begin treatment. So there's not a lot of exactness in the real world. So the last category of questions that I want to talk about in today's video are those questions that you may not want to know the answer to. And these, of course, would be questions like, when will I die? The reason that I actually made this video was because just recently I was asked that very question, not once, but twice, and in the same day. But let's go back to more ancient times when divination was far more prevalent and acceptable than it is in the modern world. One of the most enduring forms of divination that we have in our modern age is the system of astrology. Now, astrology is a great deal more than just your sun sign being an Aquarius, a Pisces, a Cancer, what have you. There's a lot more that goes into it. In addition to the sun signs, there are also things called the houses of astrology, and those houses in astrology are also prevalent in the divination system of geomancy that I've talked a great deal about here on Fairy Fortunes. One of the 12 houses of astrology and geomancy is, in fact, the house of death. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned that in older times, there weren't necessarily insurance investigators, there weren't lawyers, there weren't necessarily even medical doctors that you can consult over physical issues that you were having. So instead, you went to your local wise person and had a divination reading for these things. And also in these older times, as I said, there were no lawyers. No one was there to do any type of estate planning for you. So the question, when will I die, was actually one of the most common questions that was asked of an astrologer or a geomancer, especially in the Renaissance era, because it was in a type of estate planning. If you had a general idea of when you were going to die, you were then able to better plan for your future and the future of your dependents. So it was not this very taboo question in older times. However, much like medical questions, if you ask a diviner if you're pregnant, it's just so much easier to go down to your local drugstore and purchase a pregnancy kit. So if you are concerned about issues of death, you probably are better served by seeking out a doctor, a nutritionist, or a good estate planning lawyer. So if that's the case, why did these two people come to me at a festival and ask me when they were going to die? One of the people that asked me when they were going to die was clearly a person that had a terminal illness. And in that case, the reason that she asked that question is that it was all encompassing in her life. Death was imminent for her. And I chose to answer that question even though it was taboo, because I realized that this was a topic that she needed to talk to someone about. She needed someone that could listen to her and talk to her very frankly about what it meant to die, because it was not a conversation that she could have with her loved ones. And the conversation that she was seeking was not a clinical one that could be handled by a clinician of some kind, like a medical doctor or a mental health professional. She simply wanted to have a conversation about death. And actually, in that reading, I didn't give her a date and time. We talked about treatment options and experimental ideas, and we talked about what that might look like and what her feelings might be about that. And once again, those were options that she creatively then was able to consider. Another example of questions you may not want to know the answer to are frivolous questions. It seems to me that especially tarot readers just get incensed when you ask them frivolous questions. They feel that it is disrespectful to the art form that is tarot or divination. I was at a cosplay festival and Harley Quinn paid me money to ask the question if the Joker was finally going to defeat Batman. And you know what? I answered her question because she paid for it. I'm not here to judge what people want to know. I'm not here to judge what people are ready to know. The reality is that maybe that Harley Quinn that day needed to hear what I had to say, because actually in her question, the cards revealed that if the Joker was in fact going to defeat Batman, he was going to do it that day. Or the other option was that Batman had already been defeated by the Joker, because the Batman and the Joker are two sides of the very same coin, and one cannot exist without the other. And so perhaps the Joker had already defeated Batman, and maybe that Harley Quinn needed to hear that information. She needed to know that there are always options, that there is always hope and possibility. When I'm at festivals, people sit down at my table and wait expectantly. And I often say to them, "You always pay the fortune teller first. Do you know why?" And they say, "No, why?" And I say, "Because you may not like what I have to say." Because really, I have no way of knowing as a diviner whether or not a certain question is one that you're not ready to hear the answer to. That's really not my responsibility. There's always a risk when you visit any type of professional. Even a doctor may be giving you the answer to a question you'd rather not have the answer to. That's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to provide the service that we've trained for. So it's not my place to judge what questions a person is ready to hear the answers to. Then what is my responsibility? Am I liable for the advice that I give as a fortune teller? You can't necessarily sue someone for the advice that they give, because you come to someone for advice, then you have to make the decision whether you're going to follow that advice or if you're going to make another choice instead. What a fortune teller can be sued for is things like extortion. It would be extortion, for example, if you went to a fortune teller or some other type of diviner, and they then said that you were under some kind of curse, and that they would help you remove this curse if you paid them a certain amount of money. So that's a form of deceptive practice, and that is actually a crime. But a fortune teller, as I said, is to help you explore options, to give you some creative perspective. And it is ultimately your choice what you do with that creative perspective. And keep in mind too that fortune telling is a form of entertainment. You could easily go to a museum or a play or watch a movie or read your favorite book and get the same kinds of spiritual messages that you get from a fortune teller. It's supposed to inspire you. That's what fortune telling is about. It's a process of inspiration. But you could very easily get that from other forms of art. There are just so many options out there if you're willing to be open to those messages. If you like this video, I think you would also really enjoy my video on the categories of divination. And if you would please help me increase my visibility on YouTube by giving this video a thumbs up, or better still, by leaving a comment down below, I would really appreciate it. I am also on other platforms of social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter, and I do have unique content on all of those platforms. So I do hope you will visit me there. And do keep in mind that you can go to my website, www.fairyfortunes.com, and book a live video reading with me. Also on my website, you'll find a host of different articles that are free for you to enjoy. And I do encourage you also to check out my events page so you can see where I am appearing and performing in the near future. As per usual, I have a host of different resources for you listed in the description box down below, so do check that out. And with that, have a magical day.